Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a dramatic and highly strategic moment from the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict. A moment that shows how timing, patience, and intelligence can completely reshape the outcome of a battlefield situation. This is the story behind how Ukrainian forces waited for a Russian train to fully enter a vulnerable position, and then triggered what many analysts are calling a perfectly executed ambush. What happened that day wasn't random, it wasn't luck, and it wasn't improvised on the fly. It was a calculated, disciplined, and incredibly risky operation that required coordination at multiple levels. So let's unpack the full situation step by step and look at how this ambush played out, why it mattered, and what it reveals about modern warfare. When we talk about railways in wartime, we're not just talking about trains carrying civilians or supplies. In conflicts as large and intense as the one in Ukraine, railway lines become arteries that keep entire fronts alive. They transport ammunition, fuel, heavy machinery, artillery, shells, essentially everything an army needs to keep fighting. Because of this, disrupting an enemy's railway system can have the same effect as cutting off the blood supply to an organ. Russia has relied heavily on railways throughout its military operations, especially in regions close to the front lines. Ukraine has long understood this weakness, and instead of attacking randomly, they've been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This particular operation began with intelligence. Ukrainian scouts and surveillance units had been monitoring a specific railway line used frequently by Russian forces. They noticed that trains on this route carried not just logistics supplies, but, on multiple occasions, armored vehicles and fuel tankers. Destroying such a train would not only damage equipment, but also shock Russian logistics. However, Ukraine couldn't simply hit the railway whenever they liked. A premature strike could destroy the tracks but miss the train, wasting resources and alerting Russia to reinforce the area. So, they waited days, weeks, and even longer, monitoring patterns, tracking schedules, and identifying the perfect time. Patience became the backbone of the operation. While drones hovered at high altitudes and scouts stayed hidden along nearby roads and forests, analysts in command centers studied movements down to the minute. They observed that Russian trains tended to slow down at a specific section due to a curve in the tracks. Slower movement meant more vulnerability. It also meant a higher chance that a strike would hit the correct target. Ukrainian forces did not want to risk damaging only one or two wagons. They wanted to destroy the entire train, or at least the most critical parts of it. As the day approached, Ukrainian teams quietly positioned themselves. No loud chatter, no unnecessary movement, no signs that anything unusual was happening. The operation required absolute secrecy. One drone maintained visual surveillance far above, far enough that Russian radar likely dismissed it as background noise. Meanwhile, a strike unit waited with the precise weapons needed to bring down a moving target. The planning had been so detailed that they even calculated the time it would take the train to enter the kill zone based on previous speed recordings. Then at last the Russian train appeared. It wasn't a small supply train. This one was long, carrying multiple flatbeds with armored vehicles strapped on top. There were also wagons filled with fuel and ammunition, making the train not only valuable, but dangerously explosive. If Ukraine managed to hit it while fully inside the ambush zone, the resulting blast would be massive and could potentially destroy a large stretch of railway. So the Ukrainian team held their fire, the train inched forward, the drone operator relayed positions. Every second that passed increased both risk and opportunity. Inside their control room, Ukrainian commanders watched silently. There's a kind of tension in military operations that can't be described easily. The entire mission depended on pressing the trigger at the exact right moment. Too early, and the train might only be partially damaged. Too late, and the train might escape, or the strike might hit open space. So they waited, letting the train roll deeper and deeper into the vulnerable section. The tracks curved, the speed dropped, and the train became a giant slow, moving target. Then came the order to fire. The moment the command was given, the strike weapons were launched. Ukraine used a combination of explosives and long-range precision systems, ensuring that the attack hit exactly where it needed to. The first impact struck near the middle of the train, directly where fuel tankers were located. A massive explosion erupted, bright enough that even from drone altitude, the fireball dominated the screen. Shockwaves rippled down the tracks as secondary explosions followed, each wagon erupting like dominoes. The armored vehicles on the flatbeds were thrown into the air or flipped onto their sides. Smoke poured upward in giant clouds. But the most impressive part wasn't just the initial strike. It was the chain reaction. Because the train carried so much volatile material, the destruction amplified itself. The wagons behind the fuel tankers ignited, and ammunition inside them cooked off with rapid bursts. You could see sparks and detonations shooting out like fireworks, except each one represented destroyed equipment that Russia would no longer be able to use. The railway itself was torn apart. Rails twisted, metal melted, and wooden railway ties caught fire. The line was effectively destroyed, meaning Russia couldn't simply clear the debris and restart traffic. They would need major repair efforts, and even then, they'd have to consider that Ukraine had clearly targeted this route and could do so again. Russian response teams were caught off guard. They had no immediate way to extinguish the flames or secure the area. In fact, additional explosions continued for hours, preventing anyone from safely approaching. What began as a single strike quickly turned into a prolonged logistical nightmare for the Russian side. This ambush wasn't just a tactical success, it was symbolic. It showed that Ukraine was not only capable of identifying Russia's vulnerabilities, but also capable of executing extremely disciplined and high-risk missions with precision. This wasn't a random hit on a supply line. It was a message that no movement, no matter how routine, was safe if Ukraine decided to target it. After the operation, military analysts all over the world began discussing how the attack highlighted a new phase of the conflict. It showed that Ukraine's intelligence and timing capabilities had advanced significantly. It also demonstrated that Ukraine was willing to conserve resources and wait patiently for the most valuable opportunities. In modern warfare, where ammunition is limited and every weapon matters, such patience can often determine whether an operation succeeds or fails. The effects on Russian logistics were immediate. Losing equipment on that scale is damaging enough, but losing trust in one's own supply routes is even worse. Russian commanders had to reconsider whether certain railway lines were still safe. They had to shift transportation schedules, add more guards, and increase surveillance, all of which slowed down the war machine. And every delay on the battlefield can determine how quickly reinforcements, fuel, or ammunition reach the front. Meanwhile, Ukrainian morale rose. Soldiers and civilians alike welcomed the news, seeing it as yet another example of how their forces could outmaneuver a larger and better equipped opponent through strategy rather than brute force. The images of the destroyed train circulated rapidly online. And while war is never something to celebrate, successful operations like these show how critical intelligence and patience are in resisting an invading force. Another key takeaway from this ambush is how it reflects broader changes in warfare. Traditional rail ambushes are not new, but this one combined drone surveillance, intelligence analysis, precision strike weapons, and timing in a way that represents modern hybrid warfare. Today, it's no longer about sending large infantry groups to attack a target. It's about using technology to predict enemy behavior and waiting for the right moment. Ukraine continues to refine this strategy, making every strike count. There's also a psychological effect. When an enemy sees that even routine logistical operations can be ambushed without warning, fear begins to spread. Soldiers worry that any train, truck convoy, or supply line could be targeted. Commanders feel pressure to change their strategies. Even small disruptions multiply over time, creating bigger problems across the entire system. The ambush on this train was more than destruction, it was disruption. One aspect that caught the attention of observers was how calmly and professionally Ukrainian operators waited for the train to enter the kill zone. Most militaries in the world understand that patience is important, but there's a difference between theory and practice. It's hard to resist the urge to strike early when you're staring at a you target. But Ukraine demonstrated that waiting can make all the difference. The longer they waited, the more damage they could inflict, and when the moment finally came, the result was decisive. Another point worth noting is that this operation likely involved cooperation between intelligence services, drone units, artillery teams, and frontline commanders. Such coordination doesn't happen overnight. It suggests that Ukraine has built a sophisticated system that can handle complex operations even under constant pressure. Many analysts believe that this success will encourage similar ambushes in the future, targeting not only trains, but other vulnerable supply methods. The aftermath continued for days. Satellite images showed a long stretch of destroyed railway, scorched earth, and wreckage piled on top of itself. Russia attempted to downplay the attack, but the visual evidence made it impossible to hide the magnitude of the loss. Repair crews arrived, but had to work under the threat of additional strikes. Ukraine had shown that whenever Russia tried to rebuild, there was always a possibility of another ambush. As more details emerged, it became clear that this operation was also a message to allies. It demonstrated that Ukraine uses foreign, supplied intelligence and equipment responsibly and strategically. Supporters of Ukraine saw this as proof that training and resources were being used effectively. It reassured partners that their assistance was making a real difference on the battlefield. The story of this ambush also highlights the evolving importance of drones in warfare. Without real-time surveillance, the attack could not have been timed so precisely. Drones allowed Ukraine to monitor the train's movement without exposing troops. They could track speed, direction, obstacles, and environmental conditions. In many ways, the drone operator was the key to success, providing the eyes that allowed the rest of the team to execute the strike flawlessly. This operation is now referenced as one of the more impressive ambushes in the conflict, not because of the scale of destruction alone, but because of the strategy behind it. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't sloppy. It relied on patience, precision, and discipline, and in war, those qualities can turn even a small opportunity into a major victory. In future military studies, this ambush will likely be used as an example of how smaller forces can outsmart larger ones. It's a reminder that warfare is not just about who has more weapons or soldiers. It's about who uses information more effectively, who adapts faster, and who can anticipate the enemy's movements. By waiting for the perfect moment, Ukraine showed mastery of a skill that often determines the outcome of battles: timing. This was an operation where every second mattered, and every decision had consequences. And when the moment finally came, Ukraine acted decisively. In the end, the ambush on the Russian train wasn't just a strike. It was a demonstration of strategy, intelligence, and patience, working together to create a result far more powerful than a simple explosion on the tracks. It showed that Ukraine understands not only how to fight, but how to think. And in modern warfare, thinking is just as important as firing. That's the full breakdown of how Ukraine waited for a Russian train to enter a vulnerable position and then triggered a perfectly timed ambush. If you want more deep dive explanations like this, be sure to stay connected. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.